So I've just released a section with coaches Terry and Steve, where we're talking about the Break the Trauma Bond course, and the fact that most of the essential elements of that course are around rewriting the narrative of people's experiences. And when after we shot it, I was looking at it afterwards and I was like, sounds a bit poncy, that. It sounds a bit woo and philosophical. And then I thought, I don't know how I feel about that. That seems a bit, I'm supposed to be like, give people something that's concrete, give them something that's down to earth. But then when I looked at it again, I thought, well, really, I have been saying for a long time, like, it's a philosophical shift that we need, not really a psychological one. And I'm always very aware of the limitations of psychology and of the particular paradigm that psychology forces us to work in. But that awareness of the limitation has intensified recently. I've become more and more and more aware of just how limited it is. And then, sometimes it's my own fault. I caught stories from people where they'll tell me the failings of counsellors, they'll tell me the failings of experience they've had with coaches and with psychotherapists and so on. And sometimes some of the great experiences people have had as well, which is really cool. It's really, really good to hear. But when I think about the failings of it, I'm thinking, why? It's not that hard, really, to sit and give somebody a high quality of attention and to listen with attention, to provide space and to engage in a dialogue where every once in a while, with skill, with care, with attention, you might challenge a piece of the story, you might ask a question. Shouldn't be that hard. I can feel myself coming full circle. I can feel myself coming round full circle, because when I started this, I technically, I think I started the Spartan Life Coach channel in 2012, but it had other permutations and other names, like The Map Is Not the Territory, blah, blah, blah. And then I really started to push it and really started to get into it in 2013, 2014. And back then it was very, very much still a spiritual project as much as it was psychological. It's whatever spiritual may mean, let's say philosophical. And I would talk a lot about Buddhism, and I would talk a lot about Zen Buddhism particularly. And I was thinking, I don't want to be one of those people who flipping goes on about some tradition that they've not been raised in and that they can only really understand as an outsider, because it can be annoying. But where I am coming back around to is a philosophical approach, where I'm thinking probably one of the problems that we have, probably one of the problems that we have. I sound drunk. I feel drunk from saying probably one of the problems. Bippity boppity boo. Is that it's become overcomplicated. Psychology, psychoanalysis, the more you analyze something and the more you try and pin down that which is unpin downable, because it's human consciousness looking at human consciousness, looking at human consciousness, looking at human consciousness, looking at human consciousness, which is about as useful and as possible as taking a torch and making the torch beam shine on the beam. So everywhere the torch points, there's a beam. It's a tunnel. It's a singular flow, a reality tunnel that we're shining this beam of consciousness. It's not broad. It's a beam, and we're trying to shine it onto the beam. We shine the beam back onto the beam. It's like some weird Zen problem that you can never fix. You only hope that by wrestling with it valiantly for decades or lifetimes, you grow in understanding, or at least in humility, to the point where you go, I can't really know anything. I think we've overcomplicated it, we as humans, and in trying to pin down the unpin downable, we've created a whole lot of fluff and a whole lot of stuff. And really, probably what it needs is a sort of a stripping away more than anything else. Like, it shouldn't be this hard to find. Like, people are telling me, oh, I can't find a counselor, I can't find a coach. It shouldn't be. And I wonder too sometimes if the poor counselors, coaches, therapists are so overladen with stuff, systems, concepts, modalities, ideas, ways of getting it done, that in that overload they basically can't just do the raw instinctual human job. And he said, knowing that he would sound like a pretentious fake Buddhist, there's a lot of ego there. And it might not even be my ego. Like, if I come and I have 15 qualifications in 15 different systems, a lot of that is material, it's content. And with that comes a lot of ego. With that comes a lot of me. With that, it's almost like a kind of a little man syndrome or little woman syndrome. You should listen to me. Oh yeah, why is that? Well, I have been on courses and I have the names and titles and he's just saying, okay, there's that's good, but is any of that actually going to help? Or are there just a few key elements that are going to make the difference? Not now, but when I first went to Thailand, which is a country that is changing really, really rapidly. But the first time I went there was in 2009. And there wasn't much talk of psychology there. There wasn't much talk of psychologists. There are now plenty of practicing psychologists, certainly in Bangkok, and therapists. And what they had, I can't remember the Thai word for it. It's something like Pradwatidawai, which was, instead of a psychologist, you would have a monk, a Buddhist monk, and you tell him your problems, and then he would read bits of Buddhist scripture, or he'd read from the sutras, and he'd give you a meditation to do. And he'd go, oh, that's what you're saying. It sounds very similar to the parable that the Buddha told of the goose with the long neck, or whatever, right? And then he'd say, go and do this and meditate on this issue. Remember the parable of the long-necked goose and say this sutra over and over again for 30 days and purify yourself. And I know somebody who went through this process. I know a person, and it really, really worked for her. She didn't maintain the discipline, and so she went back to drink and pretty hard drugs. Unfortunately, it was not the happiest story. But that period of her life, I'd never seen her, so full of life, so happy, so alive as when she'd done that. And you say, well, what's the psychology? Well, she went to see a man who, within her culture, is considered to be a man of some status. She could have just as well seen a woman. I think the point is, I said man. Oh dear. Damn you, phallocentric patriarchy. It could have just as well been a woman, as long as, whether man or woman, they're wearing a robe and they have a title and they don't live in the world, they live in a temple. This would be important to me were I Thai, and this is actually important to me, and I am not Thai. The point I'm meandering to here is the things that we think we need, we maybe don't need, and the things that we think we don't need or are surplus to requirements are maybe the key essentials that we've missed. This is how we would have done therapy in centuries gone by. You would go and see a monk, you would go and see a nun, and they would give you a piece of scripture, and they might not have called it meditation, but they would have called it prayer. And people would have been much more meditative in their behavior anyway in those times, which is one of the issues with all the tech usage. It's the opposite of a meditative state of mind. And then we must accept with humility as human beings, your therapists, your counselors, your coaches, and I include myself in this, we're all steeped in culture. So we're all steeped in ideology, deeply, deeply steeped in ideology, and you can't really sort of escape that, but you can push against the walls. And the way to push against the walls is through challenging narratives, is through challenging stories, is through challenging the words we use to describe things. My idea, my concept is that if you could sit with somebody who was trained to have a meditative, I'm not saying meditation, I'm saying meditative, like a really high level of attention, concentrated pure attention and awareness of you, to observe you with no judgment, so that for that 1 hour session you've paid for, or the afternoon you've paid for, or whatever it is, you are seen. You are seen. You know, I don't really know what the monk said to the girl that I knew who got so much better so quickly, but I know that she didn't have to cut her hair, but they made her, she had to wear robes, she had to sweep the temple every day, she had to do meditation every day, her behavior was overseen, and she was made to live within a certain discipline, and it really, really helped. It really, really worked for her. And she spent time in the attention of somebody who she held in high regard, who said to her, look, what you've done is not great. You already know, you're already judging yourself for that. So I'm not going to add to that judgment, but nor am I going to tell you it's okay. Like, it's not okay. We're Buddhists, and it says very clearly that that is not acceptable. This is the thing about Thailand that a lot of people don't realize, is it's actually a very, very, very conservative country. It's Buddhist, but its interpretation of Buddhism is pretty conservative. You're not really even supposed to lie. You're not really supposed to shout. You're not really supposed to swear. You're not supposed to outwardly display anger. It's pretty stringent. And that worked for her. But can you say, okay, I'm trained in a certain system? There you go, what's it called? It's called the black t-shirt chair book system. These are the first things I saw in the room, black t-shirt chair book. And what is it? Well, it's nothing really. I'm just trained to sit and look at you and listen to you and hear what it is that you have to say. And that is a major, major part of the magic. I mean, who would pay for that? That's stupid. That's a totally ridiculous. It's an capitalism would not like that. Mr. Capitalism, Mrs. Capitalism could walk into the room and go, that is really poor. That's not, there's no hook. There's no unique, there's no USP. There's no unique selling principle. God, I can't even remember what a USP is. Unique sales point. There's no unique sales point. It's weak. You can't do that. Oh, and then people will say, oh, we know this. We heard the talk by Thich Nhat Hanh. We've seen Eckhart Tolle. We've listened to Zen and psychotherapy. We read all those books that were about Buddhism and psychotherapy. And I'm like, yeah, you read them, but you read them through an ideological framework that caused you to consume them, throw the wrapper away, leave it for 10 hours for it to go through your system, poop it back out, and then flush it away. And it's gone now. It didn't ever really penetrate you. And there's something key here. There's something really key here, but it's hard to put it, it's really hard to put it into words. It's to do with living inside of story and living inside of a narrative, and how insisting on just switching one narrative to a new narrative to a new narrative, like consuming many films, like consuming many books, like consuming many different political ideologies or political leaders, if it's done through the ideological framework of consumption, it can't ever come to any good, because you'll always, you will always, I will always, we will always seek new content. We'll always seek a new flavor, a new color, without ever asking the question, why the fuck are we even doing this? Like, what's the point? What is the point of this? And here's another thing that I'm going to say that I don't know how people are going to respond to. But I think if we miss it, we're doomed. Which is, I think the point is, dun, da, 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 to feel better. Wow, that was anticlimactic. You can't put that in a Hollywood movie. That's the fucking big payoff. The heroes, they battled through space, or if it's they battled dragons and they climb a mountain, and then they go, what was the point? The point was to feel better. Great. Thanks. Fucking great. But there really isn't anything else. Like, feeling good for you, and I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to your online avatar. I'm not talking to your ego. I'm not talking to the vaguely fractured you that's between the real you and how you think other people perceiving you. But the you that is you when you're on your own and you're bored, or you're lonely, or you're sad, or you're confused, or you're cranky, or whatever you're feeling. There's nothing better in the world for you, the real you, than to feel good, than to feel better. And there's nothing worse than feeling bad, and there really isn't anything else. This is a hard one because it reduces us to something that we probably don't really like. It doesn't appeal to the ego, which is where you come back to, again, with the fucking Buddhist, Vedic, Hinduist concepts, that your sense of self is false. But when I was growing up and I was listening to that stuff, I was like, do they mean... Like, I always thought enlightenment was like you would then be in some altered state in an altered dimension, not in the same shitty world where there's McDonald's on every corner. I thought you'd, like, escape. Ego not being really you, ego being false, is like the real you plus horseshit, the real you plus bluster, the real you plus fanfare, the real you plus an extra layer. There's a weird expression in English called gilding the lily, where you add something to a story that really doesn't be there to control the narrative and make a point. The Swedes, who have weird expressions, I think it's called either laying a layer of butter on it or laying a layer of jam. I don't remember how to say it in Swedish. I think it's butter. Like you're laying a layer of butter. So there's a real you. It is really you, but with horse shit. I think the Sanskrit for ego, I think, is ahamkara. I think it is. It's something like that. And it means the I am maker, the I am creator, the I am maker-upperer. Like the Wizard of Oz. I'm the little man behind the curtain. But if I keep twisting all these knobs and these dials and doing all this work behind the curtain, you'll get the impression of something bigger. And that's the ahamkara. So it's not pH neutral. It's not just your boundaried sense of self. It's the sense of self plus bullshit, plus nonsense, plus posturing, plus bluster, plus the desire, the neurotic desire to control other people's perceptions of us, which is really strong. So Sam's been talking a lot recently about the power of being seen, and which is a really useful principle to keep in mind. And I'm looking at that combined with the drive to control perception. And it's, you name me a problem, and it will relate directly within not 2 steps or 3 steps. It'll directly relate to being seen, or the failure to be seen, or having somebody refusing to see you, and controlling perception of you in the eyes of others, controlling how other people see you, including anxiety, depression, bad relationships, eating disorders, self-harm, addictions, alcoholism, drug addictions. All of it, all of it, all of it, all of it will come down in some way to that. So there is something, and it's a real shame, because I think like ideology has crept into it. Somebody asked me on a live the other day about what I really think of Eckhart Tolle. And I was like, I really, really do like him. I really do. I really genuinely, I would, he cheers me up listening to him. I like it. It puts a smile on my face. But in terms of dissolving problems, it's not sharp. This is not a sharp tool for the job. And I am concerned that it's not his fault at all, but for him and people like him, all that it has done is added layers to the ego, the sense of self plus bullshit, the ahamkara, where they go around and around and around the core issue, when the core issue is to return to yourself in stillness. So now even meditation is for wankers. Like if somebody tells you I'm really into meditation, I'd be like, they're probably a wanker. That's a real shame. Don't get defensive, because some of you would be like, no, I tell people I'm into meditation. I'm like, well, you probably shouldn't, because it's associated with wankers. You can now do yoga competitively. Yoga, the unification of body and mind for the express purpose of dissolving the ego. That's what yoga is. I think yoga means, I think because we have Sanskrit words in English, it's an Proto-Indo-European language. It's the same root as yoke. It's combined. Yoga means to combine body and mind for the express purpose of dissolving the ego. You can do it competitively. In the age of Instagram, give it another 12 months and you'll see people doing meditation competitively. Anything that you say, okay, this is about dissolving the ego can turn it back around and pervert it and turn it upside down and make it back into something that is like for reasserting the ego, for reasserting the bullshit. And so even me saying the word meditation now, I'm like, ugh, it's going to put people off. It's going to confuse things. But I don't know what else to say for that word, but well, Eckhart Tolle just uses the word stillness. If you come back to yourself and you're still and you don't say anything for a bit, like stop speaking for a bit, might be 15 minutes, might be a few hours, I don't know. Something happens. And it's not an effort. You don't have to go, oh, I'm making something happen. You don't do anything. You just become still and quiet, and you don't move and you don't speak, and something grows in you and it feels right. It feels good. And then words will fail us. We go, I feel oneness. I feel connected, and that's like, it's so nowhere near close to describing that particular feeling. It's like oneness and connectedness, yeah, kind of, but it's a different thing altogether. To bring it back to the counseling context, you probably want to be talking to somebody. They don't need to live a perfect life. They don't need to never swear. They don't need to never drink or whatever. But to have a foot in stillness is important. To have a foot in it's not stillness. It's not stillness, because then stillness. Oh, okay. It's not stillness. It's not meditation. It's a non-state. So, and I could tell you what the opposite is, though, because the words are content and they point to a thing. So the opposite is a mind full of stories, full of narratives, full of bullshit, full of this is the me that is the me, and I'm doing this, and I'm updating my stories on Instagram, and I'm updating my stories on Facebook, and now YouTube has stories so that we can have even more stories of the self. It's not that, it's the opposite of that. It's where you just sit like a cat, staring at nothing. See? How are you going to convince people of anything when you can't say in words what it is you want them to do? You drop out the story, basically. It just drops. The story drops. And the whole dynamic shape of your internal reality shifts in a way that is non-neurotic and sane. And it feels good. When I've figured out how to say this more good, more better, then I'll get back to you. But it might be one of those things where you just can't say it. Like, as soon as you try and put words to it, it just comes out as weird sounding mumbo jumbo from somebody who just, did you take ayahuasca the other day? Is that what's going on here? Is that what it is? What have you taken? I just want to tell you that God, he's not an answer. He's a question. Okay. Okay. That's helpful. Meanwhile, I have to pay my fucking phone bill. Meanwhile, I have rent to pay. It's the world as it is it's, I don't know whether by design or this is just the way we've ended up. It's very, very hard to keep out of narrative, to keep out of story in the world that we live in. Very, very, very hard. But if you manage to do it for like an hour or two a week, you know, that's still pretty good. And I don't know what your thing will be. Like for me, yoga's pretty good. Pretty good. Nature's the one. I can mainline me some nature and I get a result every time. I think every time. Last night I went to I looked up. I'm in Ibiza at the moment, and there's this myth that when Odysseus was tempted by the sea nymphs, the sirens, the mermaids, it was at a rock off Ibiza, off Esvedra. And I started to look into more of the mythology, like the old gods. There are like old Phoenician gods that hang around here. Old Phoenician gods and goddesses that hang about these parts. And I went to see something called, I think it's called Las Puertas del Cielo, which I think means the heaven's doors, last night, and watched the sunset from there. So you had the sun setting over the sea from these high cliff tops, and then the moon half, like right up there, right above, and the sun was there. The sun was setting there, the moon was there, and then behind was just cliffs and just seagulls. It was intense, man. It was intense. Like you couldn't not. You'd have to be holding on pretty hard to story to not drop out of narrative for a minute there. So that was pretty reliable, but I guess it'll be different for everybody. Well, I don't know whether I said anything there. Certainly words were coming out of my face, but I don't know if I said anything at all. Okay, if anybody has any questions, if you write them now and they're one sentence and they end in a question mark, I will try and answer them. Answer them. Words fail me. Shawnee's Tarot says, sitting in nature works well. Seems to. Tina Edwards says, wise words. I'm not sure that they were wise. I'm not sure that they were wise at all, but they were words. It is like a finger pointing to the moon. Ooh, it's a long one. Do you agree with Slavoj Žižek and Noam Chomsky about Assange? Stop trying to lead me back into story, you. You think I don't see what you're doing? I don't know what Žižek and Chomsky have said about Assange. Aren't the tactics somewhat narcissistic? I feel with this question like you're leading me to think that the tactics are narcissistic. I don't know what I don't know what's been said. Controlling people's perception, turning him into a villain, defamation, smears, and gaslighting. Wowie. I thought Zizek was a supporter of Assange, but I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what. I don't know, man. I kind of feel. I mean, you're talking about people who are legit intellectuals. Zizek, extremely high IQ. Chomsky, really clever. Nobody would ever accuse Assange of being stupid. So I really don't know. I've not kept up with it, but it sounds like something's going on. Maybe I'll look into it. Pamela says the blinders are off. Total insight into the whole NPD. That's good, man. It's really good. Dylan says, sorry, I just reset you. Dylan says, any advice, or asks, covert abuse, any advice on how to deal with the question, what do you mean he didn't make you feel good? Huh? Okay, so in a neutral state with no presupposition or prejudice. What do you mean he didn't make you feel good? I mean, there is a state of being in which I feel good, and he didn't put me in that one. That's how I would answer that. And do it with that pace and that slack-jawed. Sometimes people can feel good, and sometimes they can feel bad. And of the two states, he put me in the bad one. I put the lotion back in the basket. And then they'll leave you alone. Just demand that they put the lotion back in the basket and eventually they'll go away. Dylan goes on to say, he was very manipulative and it was hard to explain gaslighting without sounding paranoid. You wrote S-O-U-N, ding, paranoid. High maintenance and maybe a touch crazy. Damn. I mean, it is hard to describe gaslighting to somebody who hasn't experienced it, to the point where, I mean, I can't advise you, so I won't. But I would say what I do is, my rule is I don't talk about that kind of thing to people who've not been through it, because it's not kind. It's actually bad. It's not good Buddhism, because compassion, right? It's a two-way street. And it's not, compassion is not feeling sorry for somebody. Compassion is not sympathy. True compassion in the Zen Buddhist tradition is more like accurate assessment of the system function. That's compassion, but you apply it to humans. So for me, I don't discuss. I mean, I wouldn't speak Spanish to somebody who doesn't speak Spanish, because they just wouldn't know. All they'd hear is and they wouldn't know what I was saying. So I wouldn't. So it's really tricky. If you've been the target of that kind of narcissistic abuse, you kind of need to be speaking only to people who are in that situation where they've been through it themselves. Otherwise, you're talking about stuff that's like on the dark side of the moon. It's really, really unlikely that they'll get it. Unpleasant situation. Richie, you're looking like you had a bit of cannabis. I think this is the effect of sun. Do you mean I'm looking a bit squinty? Yeah, I think it's sun. I'm not a big fan of cannabis. I don't like the way it makes me feel. I'm just looking for questions. Ooh, what are your thoughts on the red pill and the work they are doing on human nature? I don't really know. The only experience of that phrase, red pill, I have is through Rollo Tomasi's book, but I think there's a whole field called red pill that goes beyond that. So I don't know enough about it. Sorry, mate. Richard, what's your take about making childs? Um, I'm a true Gnostic. I'm a true Bogomil. I think that that all that does is binds more souls into the darkness. No, I'm joking. I don't. Making children, uh, be careful. Like, be nice. Have a good old think about it. Don't do it thoughtlessly. Another droid. What have you been eating? Today's been a pretty keto day so far, but not deliberately. I just trained yesterday, so I just wanted to get loads of protein in. What music do you like? I like Lamp. I love it all. At the moment, I'm listening to. Yesterday at the gym, I was listening to Bachata tracks, and then I listened to some Rammstein and some Sepultura. And what else did I listen to? Don't know. It'll just come to me. I'll just be like, oh, now I need to listen to this. Now I need Prodigy. I listened to Prodigy yesterday. I was raised by an overt narcissist. I've become agoraphobic with panic disorder. Is there a way to overcome agoraphobia? You're talking to, I warn you, Moon Goddess Tarot, which is your handle. I am a bit of a stock record when it comes to these kinds of questions. And I don't want to bore and frustrate people who've been listening to me for years. Most mental health issues, in my humble opinion, based on the research that I've done, tend to come down to some kind of traumatic response. And the model I use mostly and adhere to the most strictly and have gotten the best results with is the model offered in Pete Walker's book. Pete Walker, Walker as in I go walking, and his book is called CPTSD from Surviving to Thriving. So anxieties, panic disorder, as you said, agoraphobia, don't know how it should be said, agoraphobia, will also be, for me, within that sort of area, that model. It would come down to some kind of a defensive response to trauma. What would it be if it was panic disorder, social anxiety, agoraphobia? Is it that being seen became dangerous for you as a child? Was it dangerous for you to draw attention to yourself? Has it flipped into something that is a much deeper biological genetic memory of being in an environment with predators where we dare not leave the tree line, because if we go out into the open plains, an eagle will swoop down and eat us? I don't know, but something like this seems to be happening. And so the usual way to look at these things for me would be to see them as what Pete Walker describes and other people who work with CPTSD describe as an emotional flashback. My suggestion to you, my challenge to you would be to get my free course, How to Stop an Emotional Flashback. It's totally free. Just go over to SpartanLifeCoach.com and right there on the homepage, follow the instructions and you'll get your course. And then give it a week. Give it 7 to 10 days. Run it every day, run the exercise every day. If your emotional flashbacks are reduced and the agoraphobia comes down, then we can say, hey, there's a pretty good chance that this is a manifestation of CPTSD. This is actually this is an expression of trauma in childhood that's manifesting now. And then we might be able to find a road to recovery. I'm not saying it's easy, I'm not saying it's quick. If you've been living this way your entire adult life, and I suspect you have, I suspect this has been this way since childhood, and that it's just come and gone. It goes up and down in your life, depending on what else is going on. So your agoraphobia goes away, and then you break up with somebody, and then the agoraphobia comes right the way back. This would be quite, should I say normal, at least typical. then yeah, the CPTSD model would be a way of recovering from it. We would see it as an emotional flashback, and we try and resolve it as an emotional flashback. Penny says, crap, this sounds like me. This sounds like a lot of people. This is quite common. How are the planes to get together in Spain coming along? Well, I'm looking at more locations tomorrow. I've been looking at locations last week. It's really just a question of the logistics right now. It would be Spain, most likely. At the moment, very, very likely it would be Ibiza. I hope it happens. I'm very much looking forward to doing that kind of work with people. So we'd actually run group residential retreats, maybe 4 or 5 people at a time for 5 days, and get some pretty intense work done. For the deeper issues with people, it is frustrating to only do like an hour a week with somebody, because you get to the point where you're getting somewhere with them and it's like, oh, time's up. So that would resolve that one. Plus, my suspicion about, this is not published research, this is my idea, about trauma and traumatic responses, is that they're a result of an impression that's been made on the central nervous system. And to be perfectly blunt, the impression that I can make on you, on your central nervous system, via talking to you once a week over Zoom is limited unless I can get you to commit to doing a lot of exercises and you'd have to listen to a lot of audios, whereas if I can get you to come out of your normal environment to a different environment where everything is strange and new and different, we might be able to create more of an impression on you at a neurological level. That would be my hope. Is that something like that could happen. Penny R says, but you did it, Richard. Did what? What are you talking about? What did I do? What was it? Bronte says, where will the retreat plans be advertised? Join the newsletter at spartanlifecoach.com. Any retreat plans will be first. The first notice will come from the email list there. And then the second notice will be through YouTube. So you need to make sure that you are... Oh, YouTube has changed it now. You need to push a bell and push subscribe. And whilst we're at it, you should like this video, because I have people who have multiple accounts and I upload a video and then they come on and they log into 5 different accounts and then they downvote me. And I'm hypersensitive and hypervigilant and really, really hurts my feelings. So please like this video. Please come to New Zealand too. I'd love to. Again, come back to New Zealand, you mean. Please come to Australia. You mean come back to Australia. Jessica Kelly, no relation, I hope. Lol. Do you think the children of incarcerated parents typically go on to have poor adult relationships? I don't know that if the incarceration is what would do it, but the thing that got them incarcerated, we know from the published peer-reviewed research that it's highly likely that people who end up being incarcerated, a good number of them have pretty serious mental health issues and personality disorders. So the personality disorder and the mental health issue that got them to the place where, governmental forces, governmental bodies said, right, you have now been such a bellend, we have to lock you in a room as punishment and to prevent you from your bellendery. That would be the issue. So that I would reframe the question to be more looking at, if my parents had mental health issues, or if my parents had a personality disorder, what would be the effect on me of that? Sorry, I missed a lot of questions there. Well, come to Australia then, maybe. When are you coming back to the US? Soon. Come to Turkey. I was in Turkey just 5 months ago. Omnia says, best way for those steeped in story from childhood to begin to implement this. Whoa, it started fading as I was reading it. For CPTSD, should one complete the emotional flashback course before trying to do this? Look, you. look you this, everybody, please. You must work on the emotional flashbacks first and foremost. There is no greater urgency in your life. The emotional flashbacks are making it hard for you to go to the supermarket. They're making it hard for you to go to the gym, to go to work, to maintain friendships. They're making it damn near impossible to maintain healthy relationships of an intimate nature. Whatever it is you're going to do, if you think that you have CPTSD, make working on reducing your emotional flashbacks the top priority. There's a new course coming out soon. The one where I was talking about curing CPTSD, and I said I'm going to do audios where we seek to heal the negative injunctions from the superego, which is the inner critic. So I've started to work on the design of that course last week, and I'm going to insist that everybody who does that course spends 7 days working just on their emotional flashbacks, just on their state management, and just on maximizing the self-soothing techniques. So that before you even begin to absorb content that is designed specifically for people with CPTSD, you are in a good state. Now, if you were going to go and try and do Zen meditation or, I don't know, anything, you've got to get those flashbacks reduced. I mean, if you want to have a chance at living a normal life, you need to reduce them. And not to catastrophize it, because we're good at doing that ourselves. Don't underestimate the power of the emotional flashbacks. If your emotional flashbacks are regular, and you say out of a scale of 1 out of 10, you're rating them, you go, they're not that strong, but I know I'm in an emotional flashback. I'd rate it about a 3 out of 10. And I go, okay, how many of those 3 out of 10s do you think you get a day? And you go, average day, 4 or 5. Okay, it's not that much. It's not that often. It's not, because there are people who live in a cascading series of emotional flashbacks that are rated between like a 7 and a 9 that I've worked with. But even that regular 3 out of 10 emotional flashback, it's not free. It's not for free. Do you know what I mean? It costs. And it costs perception. It warps our perceptions. I've lived this. I've walked this. And I can look back on episodes in my life that it's all fairly sedate in the last 3-4 years. There's nothing dramatic or anything. It's all fairly like, first world, middle class type problems. But I can look back on things that I've done and said 3-4 years ago and be like, why did I do that? What was I doing? Why would I say, what was I trying to achieve when I did that? We're used to it. We live it. Where the goldfish living in a fishbowl doesn't realize it's swimming in water. This is just life, right? But your flashbacks, they're slowly, every day, they're corroding your perceptions. So your perceptions get wavy. They get real psychedelic, and they tend towards dark conclusions. So you'll tend towards seeing people as being of dark intent where they really aren't. There is one researcher, maybe borderlining on controversial or at least contested, who uses a term that is post-traumatic embitterment syndrome. Okay, whether that exists or not, like, that's an academic question, but something like that seems to happen. And people who are really, really struggling tend to see the world in very, very dark hues. Like, everybody is predatory. It's all about sex and money and violence and power. And, once you start healing from that, you go, there's definitely that there, but it's also about comfort and boredom and TV and laziness, like the pedestrian, quotidian, daily stuff of the masses of humanity is not like a Game of Thrones episode. It really isn't. It's people just trying to, it's way more depressing than that. It's people basically numbing out the banality of their lives that they intrinsically feel are pointless. But that would lead me on to another talk. we'd have to talk. I mean, and that talk, you'd have to get into economics and politics, and I'm not strong on those subjects anyway. I'd give it a go, but like the world that we live in is way more. It's way less about real dark intent and far more about people anesthetizing themselves against the banality and pointlessness and futility of their lives and of the lives of people around them. We are a species without purpose right now. We're a species like, I don't even know how we're not just in the middle of the zombie apocalypse, because people are keeping going. And I'm like, why? Why? Well done. Well, I'm really happy because I don't want a zombie apocalypse. I don't want people, civil war and cannibalism. But I am also slightly bewildered by it. I'm like, what's delaying the revolt? What's delaying the civil war? I have no idea. Maybe reality TV. Maybe the fact that Game of Thrones new season just came out. There's always more bread and circuses around the corner. Just wait. Just give it another 4 years, another 3 years, another 2 years. Maybe it'll get better. I don't know. So, which leads me back to what I was saying in the beginning, which is, and I never really finished this point. It's a woo point. That which is born of ego, which we established earlier, is the ahamkara, which is the bullshit maker. That which is born not of who you really are, but of who you are plus posturing plus bluster. That's hard to say as well. Posturing plus bluster. Wow, please. Heavenly Father, save me now. Plus bluster. If that's in the seed of what the endeavor is, it corrupts everything further down the road, which is a slightly woo point. Well, you can back it up psychologically as well, but it is a bit of a woo point, and when it's woo, it's Buddhist flavored. Like Buddhism has the recurrent theme as elements of some of Christ's parables did. You reap what you sow. That's right there in Buddhism. The idea of the seed will then one day flower, and it will become something, and then it will die, and it will help more things to flower later on. This is the cycle of life and death. When our whole culture, not individually, because psychology is the study of the individual, and that is one of its major problems. When groups, and by groups, I don't mean groups of 10 or groups of 100, I mean groups of millions of people choose to live a certain way, but they let bullshit enter the seed of the endeavor. When that seed flowers times 60 million people, which is the population of the UK, 330 million, which is the population of America. I'm astounded by the number of Americans I speak to who don't know the population of their country. It's 330 million. 330 million human beings. 330. It's a lot. So if there is seed bullshit and we all agree to it and it goes out amongst 60 million people, you have a big, big problem. So what I was going to say before is that narrative always gets corrupt. It always rots. Stories rot. They have to. Stories have a life cycle and they die, and they're supposed to, because they're true. Like there's a story in 1986 that was true for 1986. We shouldn't be trying to tell that story now. It's not true anymore. It's dead. And I actually wonder if even maybe you could get into like morphogenetic fields and say, well, once that story has been plundered for all of its value, maybe some stories are not infinite. Maybe like once 100 million people have enjoyed that story, maybe it dies. Just leave it alone. It's dead. You're now humping a corpse. Can you stop? Because it's pretty gross. Just let it go, man. Let it go. So stories are always corrupting. They're always corruptive because they're not when I say this, I mean like narratives. When we try to live via certain narratives, there's always a corruption in there because they rigidify that which is fluid, and they make permanent, or attempt to make permanent, that which was transitory and was just in the moment and then should be let go of. So I'm going to stop there because I've nearly spoken for an hour. Haha, supposed to do 10 minutes, lol. For the individual, coming out of story, dropping out of story, coming back to whatever we want to call it, stillness, a meditative frame of mind, is really, really healing. It's really, really helpful. For an entire culture, an entire nation, an entire group of people, it can be very hard to get them to come out of a story and to drop out of a story. And sometimes nothing less than, fairly major catastrophes, wars, diseases, will allow them to do that, because we repeat. Human beings will repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat until the wheels fall off. When you give your time and attention to something, you strengthen it. If you give your time and your attention to stillness and of being in the moment, you'll strengthen your capacity to be still, to be in the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the time and the attention you've offered me.